I'm not really in charge of user happiness. It's one of the things I do. User happiness is one of those wonderful Californian titles. You know, it could only happen somewhere near Marin, right? But what I really do sort of in day-to-day business is I talk to the engineers who actually make Google work. I talk to users, as you see on the slide here. And I spend a lot of time basically trying to figure out what are these people doing and how can we better make the engineering, the software, the system, even better than it is now. And one of the things you may not realize is that Google is constantly changing. It's constantly improving. If you tried to run some of the searches now, say 4 years ago, 5 years ago, they wouldn't work nearly as well. That's partly because the web is an constantly evolving, unstable, dynamic, wonderful repository of stuff, right? That's always changing, but we're changing too. So this is really a story about how people like you, like the folks I've interviewed, how they understand Google and what we do in response to that understanding and how we can make the whole process better, okay? So I want to start off with an observation. I see a few of you have open laptops with Wi-Fi. I think that's excellent, right? Because at work, at my work, essentially, I would come to a meeting like this, every one of you would be online, every single one, okay? Now, the people who would participate in a Wi-Fi search-based existence have a different experience of a talk than people who don't. Let me make the following argument. If I say something like this topic is much more interesting if first you have a bumper of Nottingham Ale. How many people understand that phrase? Okay, excellent. Okay, only a couple of you, right? First off, you need to know what a bumper is. Second of all, you need to know what Nottingham Ale is and why that's interesting. So if you're Wi-Fi connected, I assume some of you have already done this search. That's good. That's good. And when you do that, you will discover that it's a reference to an old drinking song. Okay? Now, that tells you only a little bit about me. I'm actually more interested in music than the ale. But the point is that this is the kind of connectivity, the kind of connection with the content that you can have. So if somebody says something slightly askew, you can look it up and understand it. Okay? And one of the things this does is it really changes the dynamic. So let me tell you a quick story here. It only works if you can kind of do search in the context of the moment, if you're facile at search, right? So here's a story for you. We at Google and places around the valley interview a lot of PhD candidates. They've worked years in getting their material just right. And so I remember we had one candidate come in, and he was very proud of the work he'd done for the past 6 or plus years. And he was presenting his analysis and his system, and he said, very first thing of the talk was, my data is all out of my website. My friend sitting next to me went out to the website, downloaded the data, and as he described the system during the course of the talk, he re-implemented the entire thesis in MATLAB from scratch. And at the end of the talk, my friend raised his hand and said, you know, I have a slightly different answer. Let's talk about that. Right? So what happened here was because the data, he was very gracious about it. He didn't say, you bozo. He was very gracious about it and said, look, now let's advance the clock cycle time of science. We can now do the work within the course of the talk that would have previously taken weeks, months, perhaps years. Right? So what happens is that once you can do that search and grab that data and do the rebuilding in real time, science changes. Our lives change. Okay? So while Google is good at finding stuff, I will tell you, we're not able to yet implement ESP. I don't know how to build the right mind-reading module. If I could, I would. Right? We do some things that look a little bit like mind-reading, but don't be fooled, right? So let me tell you another deep, dark secret, which is that there is a component of the information space that's out there. And so this is for the librarians in the room. Right? There's a component of web space that we will never be able to index. That's the deep, dark web, the stuff we can't get to. Right? If your content, your stuff is down there, all the Google searches in the world will not get you there. So you still need to know the information landscape. It's not enough to know that there's a single search box out there that will get you everything. It's not true. We're doing our best to try to index all the world's information. but the world is generating information faster than we can index it. That's a fundamental truth. And so you will always need to have a little bit of expertise in your domain, in what you know, in order to be good at it. So let's start this whole thing by talking about expertise, right? Now this is one of my favorite graphs in the world. This is the men's high jump world record. And the question is, what happened in the early 60s? Does anybody know? Okay. Well, basically there's an interesting nonlinearity there, right? All the sort of expected things blew up, and they blew up for this reason. This is something called the Fosbury flop. I'll run a little piece of video here, where this guy jumps over the top the wrong way. He goes over backwards. You've probably seen this, and now if you're a child of the 60s or 70s, you think, well, this is just normal, right? It is not normal. The normal way to go is belly first, or legs over, or Western roll, or something, right? And so this innovation, done by Dick Fosbury, changed the scope of the way people could jump over high marks like this, right? It's a very clever technique. Now what's interesting is it's actually coupled with a technology change. You see he's landing on foam. In the 50s, they landed in sawdust, right? So you would break your neck doing this in the sawdust, right? So there were two things. A, he was able to do it. B, there was a technology change that allowed him to land safely, right? What that changed was the definition of expertise. You were not an expert if you could only jump 6 feet anymore. Now you had to jump 6'4", 6'5", whatever the number was, right? So expertise, and including search expertise, what you do on Google, is really this set of skills and the knowledge. So it's the combination of the technology, what you bring to the domain, and what set of skills you bring in order to be able to do this kind of almost automatic behavior, right? So in particular, I want to point out that skill definition changes a lot over time. So a particular surgery that was state-of-the-art in the 50s is hopelessly antiquated today. Searches that were state-of-the-art in 2000 are hopelessly antiquated today. Moore's law applies not just to computing, but also the entailments of that, which is you are smarter now because of the increase in Moore's law and the increased computation that web services like Google or any of the web engines can do for you. So basically, I want to make the quick argument that expertise is really the superior performance. And you know this, right? Everybody sort of knows this. But one of the entailments of this is that line on the bottom by Erickson, right? Search expertise acquisition, sure, there's a time-based component as you learn over time, but watch what happens, right? People very quickly plateau out. I'll come back to that in a second. What I want to do first is show you a little clip of a video that I have of somebody doing very advanced search. I'll just let it run for like 30 seconds. As you watch it, think, could I do this?
One means to first look at how someone else does it. Here, we see a user looking up a search pattern on YouTube, then watching the video to remind her how to search for MP3s and other music file types. As you can see, the video shows how to use the in-title operator to find the string index up in the title of online music directories. The pattern also uses vertical bars for disjunction, periods for exact match, parenthesis for grouping, and the minus sign for exclusion.
So it's listening directly to someone's file that they're hosting along.
Okay, did you see what she did? It was really marvelous. She was trying to find out a particular MP3. This is in a user study we ran at work. And she went to YouTube because she remembered that there was a little YouTube video of somebody doing this kind of search. She runs the video, goes, oh, that's how to do it, right? She didn't actually remember all that, right? Now, a few people actually know that these kinds of queries can be composed out of all that pieces like in title and double quotes and all that jazz. What I want to get at is, what does it take for you or anybody you know to get to be that good? Okay? So one of the things we notice is that, as I mentioned, this plateauing effect, what happens apparently from our studies is that people do searches and they get good up to an acceptable level for them in their social context. Interesting. What does social context have to do with this? Well, let me tell you another story. I've gone out and recruited people who are expert searchers, self-identified self-expert searchers. And they come to me and I interview them, and some are really good and some are really terrible. And I think, well, why is that? Well, what's going on? And what became quickly evident is that people identify themselves as expert in their peer group, right? If they're the best searcher among, say, a set of plumbers, then they're the best plumber searcher, and that's their group. That's who they know. That's how they identify themselves. Okay? So what's interesting about this is that people kind of go along these different sort of peer group defined levels of expertise. They kind of get better and better and better, and they kind of flatten out. What then happens is that some kind of exceptional event happens. I need to really look for files of this kind, or I need to look in this site, and they learn something new, and so their performance gets better, right? That's kind of what you'd expect. What also happens is that you get subsequent versions of that, and also you get this inevitable tailing off. If you don't practice, you degrade. You know this, right? It's true for search expertise. We try to make the search interface as fluid, flexible, and intuitive as possible. But think about it. What's intuitive to you may or may not be intuitive to somebody in a different peer group. Right? So what also happens is that this intuition changes over time. So let me give you a modest quiz. Just a couple examples. This is Gedanken stuff, so you don't have to have your laptops out. Okay? Do you know what's on the web? Right? Think about that. The web is vast. It's really big. Do you know what's on it? I'll give you a couple ideas here. Can you find a picture of Barack Obama on the web? No problem. Can you find a picture of Rula Lenska? Okay, let me ask you another question. Who knows who Rula Lenska is? Okay, one. That's it? Two? Okay, like 4 of you who are extraordinary individuals. Okay. Yes, you can. Trust me, it's in Wikipedia, right? But you knew that. Can you find a picture of your grandmother? Maybe. Some of you, yes, some no, right? But how do you know that? How do you know that your grandmother's on and probably Rula Lenska, this old actress, was? Can you figure? Oh, okay, so all of a sudden I'm changing from something that you know about to something you clearly don't know about. I will tell you no. My grandmother's not on the web. Okay? Can you find a picture of Ted Williams? I'm starting to push the boundaries here a little bit, right? Right? Maybe somebody put YouTube, video of Ted Williams hitting a home run, old baseball fan. Can you find a picture of my grandmother hitting a home run? So these are funny examples, but what I'm trying to get at is that you actually have a fair bit of knowledge about what's plausible to find already. Right? Now, let me give you a couple of questions here. In pre-Victorian times, there were these notebooks that people would carry around, right? And they would copy down quotations in them. Does anybody know what that is? Librarians excluded. Sorry. Journal is a good guess. It's not right. It's commonplace book, right? You're the only person who's known that. But the question is a commonplace book. The right strategy, I will tell you, is not to use Google per se. Is to find a reverse dictionary. Right? Now, how many people know about reverse dictionaries? Raise your hands. Okay, I want you really. Oh, wow, like 3 of you. So that's like what, 2%, 5% maybe, whatever the number is. Okay, almost nobody knows about reverse dictionaries. They're a really marvelous tool for this kind of question. Right? You do notebook quotation, bang, commonplace book appears at the very top. Okay. So here's another one. Right, I want to buy this particular book. I don't want to buy it. I just want to read it. How do I find the nearest library? Right? I don't know if UCSF has this book or not. Maybe, maybe not. But a strategy here, for me, it's the Sunnydale Public Library, but I do a book search on Google, and there's a button there that says, find this book in the library. Right? Did you know you could do that? Yeah, it's a great trick. You can click on find it in the library, and it says, oh, by the way, you who live in 94306, it's in Sunnyvale, 4.5 miles away, right? And often case in my particular location, it says it's in Stanford, right? But nevertheless, there's this nice function that allows you to go from book title to physical location, right? I want this for my car keys. Okay. So you see what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to whittle away at this idea about what's on the web and what strategies are for doing search, right? So let me ask you this. What's the zip code with the lowest density of residents? Zip code? Well, it's actually kind of a trick question because it's the zip code that includes SFO because nobody lives at SFO. but it has its own zip code, right? So that it's actually down the street. But the trick is you have to find a table that has zip codes by population, and one stands out with 0. Right? So let me tell you, this is really trying to get you a sense for expertise. And I'm trying to convince you, you already have a fair bit of expertise about what's on the web and what's not, right? So I was at a talk, a very technical talk at work, and I was standing next to a Googler, and the speaker said, patience, grasshopper. Right? Now, some of you know what I'm talking about, and others of you don't, right? Now, my friend who's from India turned to me and said, grasshopper? And I said, yeah, just go look it up. You work at Google, go figure it out, right? And 20 minutes later, the speaker keeps talking, right? 20 minutes later, he looks at me and says, grasshopper? And so I said, yeah, add kung fu. And the look was wonderful. He's thinking, why would I add kung fu to this? Well, it turns out it's a TV show from the 70s, and that was a catchphrase from that show, right? But he grew up in India. That show, as far as I know, never made it to India. And so he was missing a piece of cultural context. Trick, he didn't know it was cultural context, right? He thought that this was some other kind of reference, maybe to a computer system called Grasshopper. I mean, you get the point, right? It's difficult to know what you don't know if you don't recognize it to begin with. And so experts fail in situations like that, when they can't recognize that the problem is out of their scope, right? Now, I'll tell you the equivalent story for me. I teach a lot of how to be better searchers classes, and this is not a class for that. This is a kind of a talk about expertise. But I gave this as an example, and I was surprised at what happened. This is actually a piece of a choir book from roughly the 15th century that I have at home, a bit of an amateur musician. And one of the things I noticed was that you see those little notes in the far right-hand edge of the staff? Those little tiny notes? I know a lot of musicology friends, and I thought, what they must have called those something. So the question is, what's it called, right? How would you find out? So I posed this. I was teaching a beginning search class, and I said, what are those notes called? And I said, everybody, open your laptops, go. And we all start searching, right? And my searches are being projected up on the screen, right? So I did a search, and I went to a page, and this is a search I did, small note chant notation. It's actually a pretty good query. And I end up on this page. And I'm scanning through that page. And because I know a fair bit about music, I go about halfway through it and say, this isn't working. Go back, and I do another query, right? 30 seconds later, somebody who's a real beginner in the back row says, I got it. I thought, wow, what happened here? Well, she read to the bottom. And it's not just me being fallible, it's that we all, as experts, constantly assess the quality of the results we're getting, right? And so what I did is I judged this as being not sufficiently high quality. I thought it was going to tell me the answer. Turns out it's called acoustos. Who knew, right? Point is, sometimes experts fail because they're too expert. They overlook the stuff where they would have read carefully, they would have discovered it. So the question really for me, in a scientific sense, is how do I measure expertise? It's a little bit like measuring intelligence. It's extremely variable. And the question for me is really, how do I get my hands around what are the critical aspects of expertise? Or for you, what do you need to know to be expert, right? So we have lots and lots and lots of ways of measuring this. One way could be, is it time to first click? Is it the speed of creating a query? Is it the speed with which you go from page to page to page? Okay? Turns out those are not really great indicators of expertise. Okay? There's a lot of debate in the field right now, but I'll give you my answer here for the rest of the talk. But first, let me fill you in with a little bit of background. Okay? These are some publicly available data about sort of weekly statistics of searches per user. So this is probably not you, but averaged over the rest of the world, right? Roughly 4 visits to Google, or name your favorite search engine per week, right? Roughly 9 searches per user per week, right? So that breaks down to kind of small, right? So 4 minutes, they go to Google, they spend 4 minutes there, right? Now, that's all interesting, but it all is a setup for the next slide, which is this. 60% of users have less than a query per day. Right? Their average query length is roughly 3, right? Plus or minus. Right? They spend 3, maybe 4 minutes. Okay? Now, this is from the Pew Internet study a little bit ago. The interesting part to notice here is 92% of people doing searches say they're confident in their ability to do search. This is on 3 minutes of practice. Right? Now, I wouldn't want my eye surgeon being confident with 3 minutes of practice per week. Right? Now, what I find intriguing is that, as I said before, 66% search less than 1 time a day. Right? So we have this really interesting dichotomy between the data, which says you're not getting enough practice time, versus self-estimation, right? And of course, as I said earlier, it's because they're in their social peer group. I am the best expert among my friends, the bus drivers of California, right? Or whatever. Right? So we do a lot of this kind of analysis, and I have gazillion pieces of data, including things like how the average session length, that is when you go to Google and between the time you start and the time you're done, how that changes over time. So what's interesting is that people spend more time. The way to read this is that it's days across the bottom here. And I'll explain what those dips are in a second. But basically, if you have a query with 4 terms in it, you spend, factor of 10 more time doing the investigation than if you only have 1. Interesting, okay? Now, what I find even more interesting is that it varies by day of the week. And so the big dips are over the weekend. So that's the weekend. I'm just looking up a movie thing, right? So what this is telling me, as a person who's interested in user happiness and search quality, is that on the weekend, people kind of do a lot of less formal, less demanding kinds of queries. Right? So you see these real variabilities. So for example, we can see, as the sewage treatment plant down on Great America Highway sees a great fluctuation in volume during the Super Bowl, we can see a very volume change in search during things like American Idol or what is it, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, that kind of thing. So we've done a lot of studies of this. I'll tell you just about one of them. We did 23 searchers, and these were all with the data that they wanted to give us. We had them all hand label it. The reason I'm talking about this is this particular set of searchers were all extremely expert. They were all Googlers, right? So this is an interesting breakdown, right? The reason I wanted to show this to you is on the far left are the complex searches. Okay? Find complex is roughly 1/3 of all the searches. Roughly 1/3. It's interesting, right? Because that means the rest of them are fairly simple by comparison. Okay? So if you look from here over, these are all, the majority, the vast majority of the searches are pretty straightforward. That helps us out, right? And it also means that people, in general, get fairly happy results because finding simple navigation, explore, learn, those kinds of things we know people are pretty satisfied. The ones that cause unhappiness are the complex searches, where I'm really trying to figure out what's the relationship between this, gene and that one, and that's a complex search no matter how you cut it, right? Right. So we know that these tasks also vary in length and so on. It's just more data for the mill here. But there are particular kinds of searches that are very, very difficult to do. If you're looking for a joke, it's hard to find a joke, right? That's a categorical statement. It's hard to find data sets. It's hard to find help manuals and tutorials and stuff, right? So there are these categorical things that we know people find difficult to do. Okay. Now, what's interesting here is that the data you want to look at here is that basically this is telling you that people spend a lot more time when they fail. What does that tell me as a person interested in teaching you how to be more expert? Know when it's not working. This is a good heuristic. You can do a search, do a search, do a search. If you find yourself in this sort of awful, vicious cycle of adding a word and then not working, adding another word, not working, stop. It's not going to get any better. Right? That's what this piece of data is really telling us. That people spend a lot of time pursuing sort of fruitless avenues. I'll give you a suggestion about what to do about that. But this is over a large number of people. We see this kind of sort of pathological behavior an awful lot. So an interesting question here is that, so which happens first when you're trying to do a search? Is it the search or the intent? The intent is sort of your basic premonition, pre-intuitive, precognitive sense that I want to understand something. So that then translates into something you end up typing. Right? So I'm really curious about what leads people to go from their internal cognitive state that says, I want to understand whatever, right? Foo. How do they translate that into language? Is there some internal or external speech thing that's affecting that? Now, we know from cognitive psychology that there are strong priming and cueing effects and functional fixedness and all that. So I've been doing a few studies of this, as you'd expect. And let me give you an example. This is a question I pose to almost all my classes. A friend told me there's an abandoned city in the waters of San Francisco Bay. Is that true? If it is true, what was the name of the city? Does anybody know the answer? Just raise your hand. Don't shout out the name. Right? Anybody know the answer? Oh, this is good. Thank you. One guy. Okay. What's interesting about this is it actually is true. But what's fascinating about this is that when I frame the question this way, an abandoned city, versus this way, I get a very distinct difference in the amount of time it takes people to respond. Okay? So this is satisfaction, this is time. What you want to see here is that if I give the statement 2, which uses the word ghost town, it takes on average, what is it about there? About 25, 30 seconds to answer the problem. If I say it's abandoned town or abandoned city, it takes on average 3 to 5 minutes. Right? Synonymization is your friend. Think about it. When you're getting stuck, think about how to rephrase the question. And don't just try to replace abandoned with forlorn or abandoned with, think about how can I restate the whole problem. Right? So let's shift our attention for a second. One of the challenges that we face as a company that puts out web-based software is that we constantly want to make it better. And the challenge is always, how can we help you on the other side of the interface see what's important in the changes that we make? Because we're constantly rolling out changes. You may not know this, but basically every time you go to Google, it's a little different than the last time you were there. We're constantly pushing out new kinds of information. So when you're looking at, say, a search results like this, what do you notice that's new? What do you notice that's different about this? So this is really about what do you pay attention to. So if you've seen this particular magic trick before, don't say anything. Let the other people enjoy it. But it's really a trick about attention. So having said that, let me do a magic trick for you. How many talks do you get to go to at UCSF where you have magic, right? Okay, here's a great one. I'm going to show you a few cards. I'm going to put them on the table. I want you to look at one. Think about it. Hold it in your mind, okay? You got it? Choose your card, hold it in your mind. Now I'm going to make your card disappear. Worked, didn't it? Right? Question, how did it work? Well, let me go back and forth. So you see that? See that? They're all face cards, but they're all different. Every single one of them is different. Question, you're all very smart people. Why didn't you notice that? Right? So the question really is, what do you pay attention to? So these are classical sort of cognitive psychology, visual inattention effects. Right? So now the reason I'm telling you this about this magic trick, now that I've told you the secret, right? Let me show you a little piece of video. Right? This is from a study that we did about an interface that we were trying out. Now, does anybody notice anything different about this interface? You guys are great. This is marvelous. I'll say something after. Let me just run the tape here for a second. Watch this. This is an eye track videotape. So you're watching the pink ball is their fovea. It's what they're looking on the page. So they're talking about what they're doing and so on. The thing to notice are those blue triangles on the left. Google doesn't have blue triangles. She's talking about the font. Okay. It's cleaner looking. I mean, you see the point. She's paying attention. She's making stuff up. Basically, she's confabulating. Because we put those big blue triangles on the screen and nobody noticed them. And we ran, I don't know, a lot of subjects on this. Nobody noticed them. So it's even in the presence of obvious, large, saturated color effects like this, unless it's material to your task, you don't notice it. And I can't tell you how often we've had results just like this. So the question really for us is how to design attention effects. So I'm going to show you another piece of video here, intriguing. This is of a woman who has a postgraduate degree and is a very smart woman. She has her own website. She has her own television show. She knows technology from technology. Okay? Now watch what happens. She does this query at the very beginning of this problem. Actor most Oscars. This is from a while ago. And then a minute later, she modifies that query to say actor most Oscars Academy. But watch what happens. So it looks totally legitimate. It looks perfectly fine. If you were trying to just watch from just the behavior of the queries, you'd say, it's not bad. But there's a transcript on the right. I'll run the video, and you can follow along. So that was the question I posed.
So this is celebrity with most Oscars. So actor, most, I'm just going to try that out. Most Oscars. Don't know. News results for actor most Oscars. Oh, and then that would be currently look back prior to Voices treatment Oscars relevance. I don't know. We need a lot of things. Are Filipinos ready for gay flicks? Why does that have to do with so that's where you can get surprised. You're like, where is this? How is this related? Bond. So I don't know. It's interesting.
Okay, hold on just a second. Let me ask you a quick question. When you click on news, I think it was news or something, did you realize that you were in the news section?
Oh, no, I didn't. How did you know? Oh.
So what's going on here? It's fascinating to me, this piece of video, because she's doing a search for the actor with the most Oscars. Right? But she's in Google News. So she types actor most Oscars to news, right? And she even reads it aloud. News results for actor most Oscars. And it doesn't penetrate, right? Now she's a very smart person, but she gets trapped because the results look very similar. It's exactly that visual inattention problem. She does not notice the discriminating features of the presentation, right? So this is a big problem, right? How do we be an expert user not just of the search engine, but of the user interface? That's your window into the tool. If you don't know how to parse that, how to visually make sense of it, then you're in trouble. So one of the things we're constantly trying to do is to match the design of the interface to things that people will recognize and use. And so what we're constantly involved in is an evolutionary process. We're constantly modifying the way it behaves, the way that the user interface is presented, in a way that the incremental steps are all understandable. Okay? So let me show you another example. This is a location at UC San Diego. What do you notice about this interface? This is just typical Google Maps kind of interface. Here's a great question. So that's just, I was looking up a place on Gilman Drive. Do you notice that little tiny blue triangle there? Okay? We changed it because nobody clicked on that. If you go to it today, you'll see it's in a different location. Do you notice that thing in the lower right corner? But nobody notices this, right? That actually, the blue thing is sort of the God's eye view. You can drag that around to the map and fly around very quickly. And you can click on this and it will zoom out and a whole bit, right? All these great features we designed, nobody got them. Now, we're not alone in this. So here's a book I was buying from Amazon. And I thought it was a nice example because there's probably the single most important icon on this entire page nobody notices. Right? So here it is. I went through and I actually bought it. Now, it doesn't show it there. Well, notice this little lock down here in the bottom corner? Does everybody know what that means? It means you're in a secure connection. It means nobody can just watch your credit card number go by. Right? That's really important, and nobody knows. Right? Okay, so part of this is to be expert means to be literate. It means to be able to read the interface. Or this is actually my favorite. This is from a previous company I worked at. I'll leave it unnamed. You would do a search on the internal directory. For this person, I used the star operator here because I wasn't sure how to spell the rest of her name. And I did it, and I hit return, and that's what happened. Right? Did you notice? No, nobody notices. Watch. The cursor changes to indicate failure. This is a terrible interface, right? The point is, we can do things in the interface, so it's partly our job as designers of experience, designers of the user interface, to make it visible, to make it manifest so you can understand what's going on. Right? So there's a lot of interesting cases like this. This is Google Scholar. A lot of people don't know that you can click on that thing, that blue link that says recent articles, and it will sort by time. Another sort of UI issue that we have. So we're really in the business of trying to design it to be the portrayal of the experience to be understandable. So we're caught between this sort of boundary of inattention on the user's part, and we don't actually get all that many signals. So we have this interesting analysis problem. So a while ago, in doing some field studies, we noticed that people were reacting negatively to the advanced search page. They would literally come to this page and go, ah, hit back. Okay. So we figured that was a bad idea. And so we redesigned the search page because people would look at things like this, like all of the words, the exact phrase, blah, 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 or they would look like usage rights. Usage rights? Now, people in this room know about usage rights. I'll tell you, most of humanity has no clue what usage rights means. Okay? And in particular, not filtered by license is very scary language. Do I need a license? Do you need a license? So the question, it becomes very, very fraught. Or occurrences, return results where my terms occur anywhere on the page, and so on, right? So we redesigned it, okay? And the net result of it is that people now bounce out of it. That's a technical term, actually, bounce. People go to a page and bounce out of it in less than a couple seconds. They have failed to use the page. We have failed as a designer. But now with this new redesigned interface, it's taken away the scary bits and put them under that plus box right there. So if you want to get to the date and usage right, you still can. But people don't freak when they see the page. That's a huge thing. Okay? We also know that people, for example, read the results in this kind of style. They go from top to bottom. Sometimes they back up and they go back. We do lots of eye tracking studies and we figure this out. Right? Now, so why this matters is because as you scan down the page, you're learning things. It causes you to reevaluate things farther up. You go, oh, I better go back and reread. Oh, now I see. And you're building up this interesting conception of what you're actually trying to understand on the page. So one of the things we find experts do is they understand that each of these results, these result blocks, is composed of a title, the stuff in black, which we call a snippet, it's like a little tiny abstract, and then the URL. Okay? The URL turns out to be important because people look at the URL and say, oh, that's a place I know, or a place I don't know. It's like ripmeoff.com. I won't click on that. But if it's, ucsf.edu, that's fine. I'll click on that. Right? So we get these interesting kinds of behaviors. You see experts choosing their words wisely. This is probably the single hardest thing to teach, and it's probably the single most important thing to know. Choose your search terms intelligently. Okay, what does that mean? Well, I was interviewing one elementary school teacher who said, I want to look at the planets that are visible in the night sky tonight. And her first search was constellation. And I was sitting there thinking, well, what about planets? I mean, don't you care about planets? Planets move around. And so 10 minutes later, I finally said, why don't you add the word planets? So you need to start in the right spot. And if you're not being successful, give up, try a different combination of words, right? So it's really a multi-step process. You almost, well, maybe you do, but I can't, frequently do a complex search in a single step. I rescan the page, I go down and I learn stuff. And so really complex searches, expert searches, are a progressive process of learning, of you becoming a mini expert very quickly in the domain. Okay? We also see people doing a lot of teleporting. And teleporting for us is not going to Google at all, but going, if I'm going to buy shoes, I go to Zappos.com. If I'm going to buy a book, I go to Amazon.com. If I'm going to, like that kind of thing, right? So we also see people doing triangulation, and this is kind of what you think of as classical research. A little piece of information from here, a little piece from here, and then I start to interpolate, right? The classic problem here is a web search question we give is, how long can you last without food, right? Turns out it's relatively easy to find how long you can last without water. Doing food requires getting it from multiple places. So the strategic approaches for a lot of this stuff turns out to be able to find a specific kind of resource, a reverse dictionary, a map, something like Google Books. You find that information resource, and then you can start to dig down inside of that. Okay? So it turns out then that there are lots of differences that we see in expert behavior. So for example, if we ask you this question like, find a painting by Georges Seurat called Le Grand Jatte. Okay? That's the behavior. Each vertical slice here is one person, and the number of clips going down is the number of steps they took. So they're just sorted by long time, right? This is that same number of people doing the second task, which is finding a man's watch. So why is one so much harder than the other? Because they look kind of similar. Well, it depends a lot on things like how expert are you at finding lists of things? How expert are you at finding particular kinds of information in the sea? It's that quick learning process. Okay? So you need to actually, to be an expert, you need to have fairly deep knowledge, right? Not only how to read a search engine result page critically, but also to understand what it is it does. What is the search engine actually doing? Is it actually doing full text indexing or just keyword indexing? Do you know? Does it matter? So this is the kind of stuff that I'm trying to understand. And I can't resist but showing you this one. This is another video clip of someone doing a search and using one of our new test interfaces. But this was something, it's just intriguing. I'll just let it run and then I'll comment on it.
I want to try one last time. I see what happens.
Let me pause that real quick. I'm sorry. I should have said, what he's trying to do is actually find something to do in San Francisco. Right? Now, I'll let it run again.
I want to try one last time. I see what happens.
Why didn't he add San Francisco?
They're not giving me a chance. I think they're for kids. That's fine. I should add that.
So I stop it there because he goes on to add evening adult activity. Okay, question. Why do we find that funny? Because we know what dangers lurk in doing a search like that, right? You actually know a fair bit, like as it's saying, right? So what I'm really interested in is what's the mental model that searchers have? What do they think about that's on the web, both in terms of what's available and also things like how are the results ranked? Points 4 there. Why do they come out in that order? Well, I'll tell you, it's because Google's algorithm thinks that one, number 1, is the best, number 2 is the second best, number 3 is the third best. You'd be surprised at how many people don't know that. But what's fascinating is that you actually run experiments and they intuitively understand this. So in particular, if we go back to that Georges Seurat search, you see, it's a little hard to read from this, I'll just show you the images here. Sometimes you do a search like this, Le Grand Jatte by Georges Seurat, and you get this product search. It's called a one box when it gets inserted in the top there. Okay, you change the query slightly, and you get scholarly articles for La Grand Jatte by Georges Seurat. Painting. So why am I getting scholarly articles? Well, it gets worse, right? In fact, if you type slight variations on those terms, you get radically different kinds of results. So here I'm getting book results, and I've asked for pick. So one of the challenges we have is how do we, Google, figure out how to support the thing you're really asking for? Remember the mind reading module? This isn't mind reading. It's just trying to take the common sense things that people type and giving you the right result. Because those are all 4 different variations on essentially the same query, but they give you very, very different kinds of results. Good news is we've actually improved that a lot in the past year or so. But by and large, people, when I go out and talk with them, don't have a good model for how Google works. It's kind of magical, right? So I asked for a while, I was doing this study where I asked people to draw models of how do you think Google works? Sketch it for me. This is the most articulate one I got. It says, I'll read it. His model was, it's several overlapping concentric circles, nonlinear Boolean targets. Great. I'm not sure what that tells me, other than he can't say anything very useful about it. And David Hendry and F.D. Efthymiadis at UW did an interesting study with incoming computer scientists and found that a huge fraction of the things they drew were also incoherent. So it's a weird, complex thing, but what it does is it leads us, meaning the vast majority of people, into a mental model of search which is basically cargo cultish. Now, the cargo cults were, sort of religious response to the aviators flying into New Guinea and cutting airstrips out in the jungle and bringing in cargo and stuff. And so some of the religious response to that was to emulate the behavior with no understanding of mechanism. Right? So they build, you see on the, models of airplanes and radio towers and all these wonderful things, trying to get cargo to come. That was the nature of it. Emulation without understanding. Okay? So I'm interested in that. I'm really interested in your cargo cult behavior, because we all have it, right? Ultimately, I'm interested in how do people understand what's in the index, how do they understand what results are ranked, and so on. Now, we've been doing a lot of this research, and I'll give you sort of a quick rundown on the 6 kinds of skills and knowledge you need to know. The first one is what I call pure engine technique. This is, can you make the engine do what you want? Can you use the site colon operator, for example? Then there's what I call information mapping knowledge. That's knowing about things like reverse dictionary or keyword frequencies or things like that. Do you believe Wikipedia or not? That's information about information. There's domain knowledge. Do you know ophthalmology? Do you know plumbing? Do you know whatever? You get very different kinds of searches if you know something about the domain versus not. Right? So one of the key skills here is how to do rapid domain acquisition. Then there's search strategy. This is what librarians have been telling us for years and years, and they're right. You need to know when to quit in your search. You need to know when to shift your approach. You need to know when to go ask someone else. There's also a critical assessment. How can I believe that this page is a true, believable page? Now, that's also subject to all kinds of effects, social and context effects as well. Medical responses to particular symptoms in China are not the same as they are here. The notions of authority vary a lot from place to place. Okay, is it believable? It's a really fun thing. I recommend you do a query on tree octopus. I'll just leave it at that. It's a very interesting question. Do you believe in tree octopi or not? And then you have site-specific knowledge. So, for example, do I trust Wikipedia? Do I trust Snopes to give me an accurate debunking of internet stories? Okay. So these 6 different aspects, different sort of dimensions of expertise. Okay. Now, let me give you, I'm going to wind up here in just a couple minutes with just a few sort of expert things. So this is really in my advanced course. I pulled out a few slides for you. One great trick for you to know about is this thing called custom search engines. And a custom search engine is basically a way of taking Google and pointing it at a few sites and saying, I only want to search these. So, for example, I built one for Canadian universities. Now, it turns out there are 139 Canadian universities. And if I wanted to search the technical literature of those, say, the Canadian university system, I would have to type in all 139 places, because they don't have the .edu convention that we have here. So if you want to go look at UBC, it's ubc.ca. You want to go look at Toronto, it's universitytoronto.ca. Oh my gosh. Here I can just do a search on all the EDU sites. Right? So it's easy to say, build a custom search engine to just search it, for example, just through pulmonology journals, or just through whatever. You can limit it by topic. You can also find custom search engines. And this is, in fact, one of the sort of meta expert skills that I'll tell you. I don't normally teach this, but if you go to custom search engine page, you can click through to find this. The meta skill here is, if you're going to do something like building out a custom search engine or building a mashup or something, look first. Look first. You'd be surprised at how often I run into people who have done huge amounts of programming. And I said, did you do a search first? No. Well, you do the search, and it turns out somebody else built it. And it's openware, and you can have it for nothing. You just wasted a huge amount of your time. Okay? So even though that seems obvious, people don't often think about that. So that's a way to find custom search engines. You can also set up alerts. Now, alerts have been around for 1 million years. But here, with the Google alerts or Yahoo alerts or live alerts, whatever, you can automatically scan news and news groups and videos and all that stuff. You can automatically have that sent to you daily or weekly or however you want. Now, question. How would you find Google alerts? I just gave you the answer. You would search for them. Right? That's what's in the lower left corner, Google alerts. That way you just search for it automatically. So as an example, I taught 2 classes of 4th graders last week. And they were very interested in using the Google translation tool. I said, so how would you find it? A sea of blank faces. I said, would you search for it? And you could see like 10% of the kids going, oh, I can search for things. That's great. Yes, if you search for Google Translate or Google Maps or Google Alerts or Google CSE, you will get exactly what you want. Okay? Toolbars. If you don't have a toolbar, get a toolbar. It allows you to do searches without leaving. You don't have to actually go to Google or go to whatever. You can just do it immediately in context. You can also do things like highlighting all the terms, because I find that lots of people use the cache link so they get the term highlighting. You can do that, but it's much better to look at the current copy and turn on the highlighting. That's what the highlight thing does over there with a yellow marker. Very handy thing. Often I find that people are looking for things they've already looked for and found the answers for. If you've already done that, doesn't it occur to you that you could probably search your own history? Well, yes, you can. So if you go to look up search web history, you can actually look through this history of stuff that you've searched for and already found, and you just click on it. This is handy. You need a login for this, a Google login, but they're free and you can get them. And then it basically writes down all your searches for you. Okay? And we know from other studies that roughly 1/3 of all the searches you do are repeats. So think about this, because it can save you a lot of time. Now, mashups I've mentioned. Now, mashups are these combinations of data from multiple resources, typically then plotted on a map. You can search for mashups too, right? So if you've got an extra programmer and you want to go build a mashup that mashes up, say, epidemiological data over maps, that's fine. But always search for one first. Always search first. For example, a friend of mine in Washington built schoolperformancemaps.com, which allows you to actually take elementary school scores and lay them on top of the map so you can find that. Again, the moral of the story here is do your searches first. Now, one thing that's really interesting, there's a lot of tricks like define, colon, and all that jazz. You can do that. But one of the things that's fascinating here is sometimes your best result is not in a web search, but in an image search. Right? For example, one guy was looking for how to do a resume. And so he goes to web search and types resume. And he gets all these long, boring articles on how to build a resume and all this jazz, right? And I said, look, just click on images. And they click on the images tab, it reruns the search in images, right? He ended up with a beautiful diagram of a resume, which is exactly what he wanted. He didn't want to read the theory of resumes going back to Aristotle. He wanted to know how to build it now, right? And so often, for diagrammatic information, problem I give to kids is, what's that cluster of gears called in the back of a 10-speed or a 15-speed? Or how do you find that? Or for people who are more adult, how do you find out what the very top line is on a sailboat? Look for a diagram, an image. You'll often be able to jump right to the solution. Right? So there are lots and lots of operators. The ones that I use the most, and I suspect you would want to use the most, are these three: the site colon, file type, and in title. Now what these three do really quickly is site colon restricts the search to that particular website. So if I wanted to find a paper written, say, by Terry Winograd at Stanford, I would type Winograd site colon stanford.edu. And it just searches Stanford, nothing else. I can also just search the .gov sites by doing site colon .gov. Okay, you get the idea. It's basically restricting your search. Very handy when you're doing very scholarly kinds of searches. File type is handy, like I show you here, for PDF. File type : PDF. Standard kind of thing is I know this author wrote a paper on this, but I want his email address so I can write to him directly. Look for the paper, blah, 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 .pdf, pull the email address out of that kind of thing. The in-title operator actually looks for the pages that has that in the title. So I was looking for American Heritage Museum, and I just did American Heritage, and I found it pretty quickly. So that is restricting the search just to the text in the title of pages. Okay? You all know about double quotes and ors and stuff like that. You can go to the advanced search page, the newly redesigned advanced search page, which will allow you to do all this without having to remember it. Okay? The link is on the home page. Does anybody notice that? Remember what I said about inattention? Yeah. The world's most valuable screen real estate, and people don't notice it. So we got to fix that too. Okay. So I mentioned a lot of this. The one thing I want to point out here is there's a lot of idea that there are these notion of stop words, right? That you can just leave out stop words. But if you're looking for something like Lord of the Rings, of the turns out to be important, okay? Or black and white is different than white and black in your searches. So word order does matter, and think about including words that you would normally leave out, especially if they're in titles. Okay? If you're adding a lot of words, generally speaking, shorter queries are better than longer queries, because once you start adding lots of words, you reduce the search space, and if you guess wrong, you're screwed. Right? But what you want to do is try to get the exact most salient words, including those little stop words in particular for titles. Okay? So let me wrap up here. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we're not done yet. This is really the beginning in many ways of the search engine world. We're constantly indexing new kinds of content. New kinds of content come around. You know, podcasts did not exist 10 years ago. We can now search over this kind of stuff. New content, new document, new resources, new topics, it's all changing constantly. So what we need to do, the search engine companies, is to figure out how to match and how to present what we can do to your mental model, right? It's much easier for us to change the code than for us to change your brains. I don't know how to modify the wetware yet. Okay? It hasn't had a real upgrade in a mega year. Okay? But what we're trying to do is to figure out how to, when you say particular things, we understand what model it is that what mental model it is you have in mind. So we're really trying to both build predictable systems that are constantly fresh and updated, and make both expert and beginning use possible. Right? Now, you're not off the hook, right? I think the users have to consider that the system constantly evolves. And so it behooves you to spend a little time. It's not that hard, but a little bit of time to understand the basics of how the search engine works. Okay? We all learned ages ago how a card catalog works. I haven't touched a card catalog in a long time. Those skills are now archaic. They're anachronistic. But the fundamentals still hold, right? So the notion of concept, the notion of groups of ideas that hold together still exist. And it's important for us to figure out how we can build our skill set, our expertise set, so that we can take best advantage of the search engines. Okay, thanks very much.